Gotcha. All right. So yeah, carry on.
Um, after I was teaching pastor for 11 years of a church plant here in the Atlanta area. Um, did very, very well. And my background had always been in missions and training and all those kind of things. And one of the things I kept seeing happening over time was the disastrous things that were happening with short term missions around the globe. And wonderful people were writing great books like When Helping Hurts, Toxic Charity, and they did a great job of showing the problem, but nobody provided any solutions.
Mhm.
So we had had incredible success. The churches I've been a part of a very strong discipleship based training model for short term missions. So I it was time for me to leave that position of 11 years. There was no reason I had to. I just knew I needed to, if that makes sense. It was just one of those moments of I was tired. It was a good run. And so I had been doing culturally like things on the side, but I found myself, we wrote and published a curriculum. Um, it's very discipleship, small group based. Our mission is to make disciples of those who will make disciples of all nations. And so that's how we started. We started with a training program to train the leaders of teams. Fast forward, we've trained over 2,500 project leaders across the United States that are in 125 countries. Um, that's very much overseen by one of my staff guys. My wife and I, again, always like we work in Lebanon right now with a whole Lebanese and Syrian ministry there, and we're healing those who healed the nations. We encourage those who encourage the nations. We're always one step back from sexy. That's what I always say. You know,
Mhm.
we're not. I can't build myself as the church planner in Tunisia. I can't build myself as that, but I can build myself as the one that goes in and undergirds and supports these people. So that's a quick overview of where we started, but the expressions are much greater than that now. We're partnered in a community in Kenya that deals with a school, um, um, about 7 network churches. We launched my wife launched an inductive Bible studies program um, in Kenya because of really just scripture kind of being handled poorly in terms
Mhm.
of the women didn't know how to study the Bible themselves, and so that is taken off in the decade plus that we've been doing this. And so again, we're really training and equipping and discipling, and that can come in the form of care. It can be in the form of um, the teams. So there's a quick overview: making disciples of those who will make disciples of all nations.
Mhm.
Well, you sent us the most complete package of information of any person we've looked at. So I actually, you've actually taken away most of the questions I would have normally asked because you answered them so clearly in um, your package of material. I love your philosophy of ministry is very Christ-centered. And I think at some point you mentioned, maybe not there, but you talked, you didn't use these words, but you mentioned a level of sort of increasing theological flexibility from maybe where you were at, maybe at Dallas or whatnot, and through life and ministry. Could you unpack that for me a little bit?
Um, the old Dallas in me says you can't let experience dictate your theology.
Mhm.
Just that's the old Dallas in me. But when you've served the globe, when you've been, I'm just going to throw a couple of little scenarios, and I mean them. when you've been, diagnosed as infertile and you're never going to have your own biological children. And at this point, you're doing discipleship training in Romania with gypsies. And this is obviously 20 something years ago. Um, and a bunch of gypsy women surround you and ask you and your wife when you're going to have children, and you give the polite answer, oh, we don't know, it's up to God, the kind of thing that an infertile couple does. And then they lay hands on you, and then they start praying all at one time, and they're translating that the God of the universe is going to give you a child, and he's going to be a bringer of light, and there's a couple that needs to know God, and they're going to conceive a child as well. And my wife and I are going, this is the craziest thing that's ever happened. And then 2 months later, we were pregnant the old fashioned way. And the couple with the State Department in Hungary that we were the closest to that were atheists, we met them in the process of an infertility group that we were visiting. And they had like 7 failed IVF rounds. And they conceived a child at the same time we did. The other couple, and so when we shared that with them, and you would have thought they would become a believer instantly, they didn't. 6 years later, yes, baptized them. But so you start having experiences like this, and you go, okay, this isn't contrary to Scripture. It they didn't prophesy we would have a child. They just were like, God's gonna, we're trusting Him to do this, to do this. So I just started getting broader and broader views. I wouldn't consider myself a charismatic by any stretch of the imagination. But I've now been in some beautiful situations where giftings are being operated in an orderly fashion to encourage the body of Christ. I'm open to learn and to continue to grow. My wife and I are part of a movement called Groundworks. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Short version of that is a Canadian guy moves to Egypt to start ministry, marries an Egyptian woman. Their ministry goes flat. I mean, nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens. And God whispered to them, how can you expect fruit when you won't do the groundwork? And so they started just praying. And with their team, they started praying. They quit strategizing. They quit, trying to manipulate God. And they just started praying. And then fruit started to happen. And like all good ministries, other ministries started asking them, what's your secret? Because everybody wants to just imitate somebody else. Nobody wants to actually, in my philosophy, Christ is the head of the church. We got to listen to Him to express Himself. And so this prayer movement started through Egypt, and then it grew to the Muslim world. And so once a year, except for COVID, there are 700 of us that gather that either support people in the Muslim world or are working in the Muslim world. But yeah, it's for the cousin world. Y'all heard the term cousin, I'm sure, right? It's the code word because Isaac and Ishmael were cousins. And so we started to visit. We were invited as guests to come in to be caregivers to these workers. And so I'm watching this prayer movement happen, and they set up this worship, and they said, okay, we're going to let God lead this time. Look around the ballroom, you're going to see signs, and it says the typist. If God gives you a scripture verse or a picture or a word, we want you to go and just share that with the typist around the corner, around the room. We can't just allow everybody to come up and talk at one time. We'll never get anything done, but share it. And they're going to send it back to the back table to our discerners. And the discerners are going to try to sort through what all God says, and then they're going to bring it up to the leader to help guide us. So I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool. Well, 20 minutes later, they come up and they said, 19 people have just sent this psalm back to us to pray over the Rohingyan people. You're like, okay, 19 different people went around and fed the same thing to the typists that went back to the discerners. And I'm like, okay, there's nothing unbiblical about putting a certain psalm on your heart to pray over people. I mean, the enemy wouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that just wouldn't be the way he would operate. And so I could give you illustration after illustration of just me growing in that. And that's honestly, that's part of the reason I stepped out 11 years ago from the church that I was I wasn't the lead pastor, I was a teaching pastor. God had kept broadening and broadening and broadening my ability to listen to him. I always kind of joke, Baptists don't believe you can listen, so they journal. That's
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing, like, okay. The elders who I got along with very well at that previous church, they called me in, and this is one of the conversations we had. I'd never been addressed on my teaching in 11 years in any form or fashion. Now, granted, I had to improve, my craft had to improve, those kind of things. And so I had this meeting, and they brought up two issues. Number one, they told me I was teaching on an experiential level that set people up possibly for failure, because they didn't really believe people could experience God the way I had begun presenting him to be experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like I was really, but I was just, there was something in it. Secondly, they also said there's something that seems in your teaching now that's a depth of that I just don't think that the people can reach. And we need you to think about our seekers, think about this, think about that. And I'm like, okay. So I listened, I went, okay, there's usually two tensions. You either get somebody who teaches so deep that there's no experience to it, it's like truth that's like cardboard.
Mm-hmm.
Or you get people that are so experiential that there's no truth behind it. And you're kind of telling me I'm doing both right now? They were kind of quiet. And I said, I want to thank you for affirming my craft, because I don't think this is something I want to change.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just God leading me. Again, nothing was ugly. Nothing was, it wasn't easy. Believe me. I mean, there was tension in it, but it was for the good. So I'm sorry I rattled, but God's just opened it up. He's done some great healing with me through listening prayer. I've guided people through that. I don't know. Y'all may think I'm crazy, but this is just kind of how I answer that.
No, that's helpful. That's really helpful.
No, that's really good. You kind of knocked off some questions that I had prepared actually about prayer, and you're interested in prayer and what that looked like for you, because that's a value for us as in our little community of faith. And so yeah, that's really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ken, did you have any questions before I move on? But
No, I'm jotting down some notes here, but you go ahead.
okay. Yeah, I wanted, like I said before, I really, I've gone over your packet, and I want to tell you how much I appreciate how much information you put into it. It's in a sense almost taken a bit of the wind out of my sails, because you have answered so many of the questions that I would have normally been interested in exploring. So shortly here, I want to actually spend maybe more time than I normally would with someone who's expressed interest in giving you a chance to ask us questions about the church and kind of framing that up for you as well. But one of the there are things I often ask that relate to kind of unity and diversity kind of things, but you really touch on that, and you even just in some of the stories you've just shared, you've made abundantly clear, I think, some of the things that that you value in that area. Let me ask you a little bit about kind of leadership style, and you, our church has come to value over the years, partly due to the fact that it's been a survival skill, but I think it's also been it ended up being a very biblical and God-honoring system of sort of cooperative team leadership at the top. And just wondered, just wanted to get your take on philosophy of ministry in terms of leadership style. And I don't want this to sound like a trap or anything. I'm just kind of tee it up for you a little bit. The position, and obviously the position gets advertised as a senior pastor position, and that's kind of the standard, at least Baptist model. But the reality is that we're very much more interested we would probably be more comfortable calling the pastoral role the head elder role, or something like that, because we've found over the years that a sort of pyramid model with one person at the top is probably not going to serve us very well. So maybe that's enough for you for me to stop and give you a chance to unpack a little bit how you feel about that.
Personally, I've never been a position leader, if that makes sense. I've actually been very burned. Yeah, my first job out of seminary was at a mega church. Top senior pastor, protected by the next level of people that had really little to do with the staff and little to do with that kind of. I wouldn't even say it was like this. I would say it's like this, and then the rest of us, and unapproachable. Early on, I'm like, I'm not designed that way anyway. I like team. I like motivating a group of people. I have people who say, let's charge the mountain, and they get to the top and they look back and there's people with skint knees and everything behind them. I'm like, let's charge the mountain, and you'll look and I'm behind, can't see my arms. I'm behind everybody, guiding them up the mountain as we go. I lead from behind and lead from within. I was pegged one time in our ministry back at a church that I was on staff with, said, I really believe you have more leadership influence on our staff from within than anybody that has position above.
Mhm.
He ended up giving me a book called Leading from the Middle of the Pack.
Mhm.
And I read that book and I'm like, this is me. This is exactly who I am. That kind of consensus and team, and you would even our parenting style, we realize is so unique compared to the families now that my kids are college adult looking backwards now. We have a room in our house. We call it the 4-chair room, and it's 4 leather chairs with a big ottoman in the middle of the 4 chairs. And I mean, our life, that's where we would do some, family devotions that went wrong because our kids couldn't keep their feet to themselves. And we're a reality family. Trust us. I mean, I'm the guy that goes, okay, I wanted to do it every week, but it never happened. But hey, we got it in 8 times this year. That was 8 times more than last year. We made progress. So that's the kind of, I want people to know this is called life. But we had a philosophy that everybody got say so. I mean, guys, I was the dad, but you could call a family meeting in the 4-chair room anytime you wanted to. And so I can remember my daughter being 8 years old, and we woke up one morning, there were signs taped on our bedroom door said, family meeting tonight. And so we all got there, and she led out with, oh, and our rule was you have to listen before you respond. We have to make sure the person that was bringing up the issues in the family meeting felt like they had gotten their point across before anybody started being defensive or arguing. But I just remember so specifically that my daughter led out that night and goes, all right, this may be really difficult for y'all to hear, but I only like 25% of this family right now, and it's me. So, I mean, we really did, we let our home, I'm not going to say consensus. My kids didn't get say so over us in any form or fashion, but it was Team Ragan. That's what we called it growing up. Team Ragan. Team Reagan's got to do this. If this isn't working for you, it's not working for us. And so, and I always showed how a man runs his house is how he'll run a church. We see that in Scripture.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. I'm going to pause here for a second. Ken, you want to interject anything, or?
I just like, you don't really have any idea who we are or where we're coming from, but
I have no idea.
What
So,
you have said up to this point, it's kind of uncanny how it resonates, in the sense of, you look at your ministry. Sam and I are both full-time missionaries with the same organization. Sam is, and his wife Carla, are primarily involved in member care within the mission. I'm also in a different way involved in member care. I oversee our church planting in Europe, North Africa, and the Americas, which is a ton of member care, but it's also that equipping stuff. It's also, when you mentioned team, I'm sure a lot of that is team dynamics, because that's what comes with team, or lack of team dynamics.
right.
Or far too much team dynamics. That definitely resonates with both of us. I think the description of the openness sounds like a very similar story, probably for both of our journeys. Well, Sam grew up in North Africa, and you've only spent a very small proportion of your life in North America. We've been, my wife and I've been overseas for about 25 years now. And it's that same thing of, when I talk to the guys in India who are not charismatic, but when he walked from this village to this village to share the gospel, he realized on the way home he wasn't speaking his dialect. And the churches that get planted don't end up being like our charismatic churches, even though they had their Pentecost moment in like 2005. So yeah, that kind of openness, I would say theologically, our church would be not cessationist, but not sensationalist. We
That is a great phrase.
just open.
Yeah, and here, I'm sorry
No, go
to
ahead.
interrupt, but I wrote this one time, and it sounds like a tongue twister, but I was trying to sort through gifts, and I believe in primary gifts. I believe in motivational gifts. I am an exhorting teacher versus a teacher that exhorts. Exhortation is what drives my teaching style. My wife is more of a prophetic teacher. I mean, she's I dot T cross. So I believe in motivational gifts. But like what you just described in India, I wrote this down. I say it all the time now. If a gift is a gift, then the gift giver can give the gift whenever the gift giver wants to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if a gift is a gift, and the gift giver can give the gift whenever the gift giver wants to. And so I'm sitting there listening to that. God decided to give him the gift of that dialect at that
Mhm.
moment. I don't question it, but I bet he doesn't have that dialect now. It was just sometimes it's the moment.
Yeah, I think so. And it's especially, I think, in places where the gospel has never broken through.
Absolutely.
That there seems to, they never got Pentecost, and sometimes they get it. That's the Pentecost moment, I think, is a phrase that I've heard you use, Sam.
Yeah.
But I resonate with the focus on prayer, and not really prayer versus planning, but prayer as planning. Things come out of that. I mean, my role in helping our church planting teams build strategy, I feel like when they get to the field, I've got to walk them through this 18-month to 2-year process where they finally realize, oh, this doesn't happen by us making a strategic plan. They still do make strategic plans, but the most successful church planting teams that we've had out there have had turning points where they decide to have complete ministry fast. We're fasting for ministry for a week and we're praying. And then they extend it to a month. And then their neighbors start knocking on their doors saying, remember that thing about God you said? So
Groundwork.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just so you know, that really resonates with both of us. That's a lot of similar experience, similar values. Yeah, I don't know if you would add to that, Sam.
Oh boy, there's so much to add to it, but I think, at least for me, we've had enough conversation for me personally to feel really comfortable that we're kind of on the same page here, in terms of values, in terms of values that we have as leaders of our little congregation, and what we want to see the congregation increasingly characterized by, and they are the things we've been talking about with that emphasis on prayer. And you haven't spent a lot of time talking about it, but I've got a strong vibe that your life has been deeply invested in discipleship, and we'll talk more about that later, but that's a huge need for us. Huge. So
Mhm.
so let me just let me ask you, Larry, is there anything you want to interject right now that's on your mind before I was thinking of transitioning to telling you a little, filling out more of the picture for you of who we are in our church and so on.
Just one note in terms of growth and exposure in this is, if you look, I'm an engineer before I was anything else. And I probably have, and actually have been semi-diagnosed with OCD, order, control tendencies. So I, in terms of that, always having wanted a strategic plan, or being able to actually outplan God and it be really efficient, to be honest with you, but maybe not very spirit led. These are things that through the years I just had to give up, and I became more rested. And um, my children say I became more kind. So, because at the 4-chair room, you're able to say whatever you need to say. So, you have to own it, repent, and seek forgiveness. And so, yeah, part of the document you saw was me pulling together things that obviously I have this very OCD organized way of doing things, but I've had to learn to listen and then draw that instead of go the other way and say, okay, God, here's some really great ideas. So yeah, it's been a growth process for me, a breaking process for me.
Mm.
And then marrying a woman who is spontaneous, who, you know, doesn't know what time it is ever. I mean,
Mhm.
or what day of the week it is, you know.
Mhm.
So,
Good. No, that's really good. It's really
all right.
helpful.
So let's transition. Yeah. Tell me, I, y'all do realize I saw y'all online and then y'all took the thing down because the next day I went in to try to figure out what it was and I couldn't find you again.
Yeah, yeah. That's really it's really interesting. We've been praying for, well, okay, let me back up. So um, our church is a weird animal that's been, on one hand, has some of the trappings of being an established church in the sense that we're more than 20 years old and we have a building, very nice looking building. And that gives us this sort of established, maybe even traditional kind of look and feel. But the reality is that our church, in spite of its age, is very much what I call a beachfront church plant. Um, we have the church was planted more than 20 years ago by a South African gentleman who more than 10 years ago left the church, went back to South Africa, and he's now passed away. Um, the uh, the church has never had a a long-term pastor since. So for more than 10 years, we've had a series of interims who've come between 2 months and 2 years, which have covered maybe 30 to 45% of that time, probably closer to 30. I'm not sure if my numbers are accurate. And the rest of the time, our church has basically been self-led. We've had a small core group of people who have been the stalwarts, kind of this, I think of them as the stakeholders in the church. Basically, from a leadership perspective, you're talking about 6, 7, 8 people who actually make the church happen and have for years. Going one layer out of the onion, we have a core group of people who actually live on the coast and are essentially members, part of the church family, which would be a group of less than 25 people. Um, if you come on a Sunday morning, I'm talking pre-COVID now because COVID's thrown a spanner and everything, but
Yeah.
pre-COVID, you'd come to a Sunday morning service and you would see 60, 70 people, and you would think, wow, really a thriving church with a good solid, by European standards, that's a good size. And you'd be looking around for the pastor. And most people who are just visiting don't realize that in normal days, uh, literally half of the people you see on Sunday morning are visitors. We think of our area down here in southern Spain as the Florida of Europe. Have you been here before to southern Spain?
I believe it or not, of all the countries, I've never been to Spain. And
Oh,
that's,
interesting.
I mean, it's kind of crazy because I've been everywhere, it seems like, but yeah,
Well,
Spain,
our area, I mean, Spain in general is a major tourist destination, but our area, our coastal area here called the Costa del Sol, is one of the major holiday destinations for Europe and the UK, and
I was
many
going to say,
many.
Sam, that it's probably good to understand that some of those visitors are regular visitors, as in they've got a timeshare September and October, and so they consider this their church away from their church. So
right.
it's not all one-offs. So when we have our online prayer meeting, there are people that maybe would only normally be in Spain every 2 months, 2 months out of the year, but they jump into our Tuesday night prayer meeting from Wales, right?
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a bigger family There's
Just
a
a second. Let me
there's a
make sure my
bigger
wife
group of people that feel some ownership over this thing than just that group of 25. I would say that that group probably hits about 60 or 70 because they're somewhat invested, but they're not on the coast full time.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been it's not, I won't, I won't lie, it's not an easy place to do ministry because simply because it's so transient here.
Mhm.
It's those of us who stay and live here full time are the rarity, and the normal is the coming and the going. Um, and the that's made certain things difficult in terms of gaining traction with people, especially in areas of discipleship and so on. Another challenge that we have, simply geographical, we're on a coastline, and Spain is a mountainous country, so the mountains go right up to the sea. And so that if you just imagine that the church is on a point on that coastline, whereas a typical church in an urban area might reasonably minister to a circular radius around it, we live on a line. And
Right.
so, like,
Mhm.
Ken and I live over in Malaga, which is about 35 minutes east of the church on that coastline. And then some people at the church live 35 minutes west of the church on that line. And it just means that we're all actually very far apart. And it's meant that doing body life between Sundays has been a real challenge for us. And actually, one of the blessings that COVID has brought to us is that it's all introduced us all to Zoom, and actually opened up some things for us to have community that previously we weren't having. So it didn't replace community that was face to face with something else. It was like we had nothing because most people didn't have the time to drive 2 hours round trip for a Bible study or so on. So it actually introduced it into a vacuum, the possibility for a level of community that we didn't have before. So it's been a plus.
Yeah, yeah. I even think that, like I said, we have people from Wales joining our Bible study. They feel ownership in the church. I think there were 4 or 5 different countries represented in the ladies' Bible study on Friday morning or Friday evening it was. So, because there are those people that feel like this is their church, even though they don't live here.
We have we have some solid women, and there is an active, and I think really healthy women. We call it the women's Bible study, but it's more than just a Bible study. They have outreach. They're very dynamic. It's everything from Bible study to evangelism to going out into the community. These women are led by some pretty dynamic, by a couple really dynamic women. On the men's side, there just hasn't been much going on for years. Um, uh, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of maturity in the church, in the sense that uh, we have this wonderful situation where we have a lot of almost unchurched people, and in some cases completely unchurched people, who are constantly coming in through the doors and being attracted to us for reasons that sometimes pass understanding. But most churches in the States, I remember my home church, I think for a while, had this sign on the inside that said, as you were leaving the church, that said something like, "You're now entering the mission field." You probably heard that one, or had a church that did that. We don't need we don't need a sign like that, because you don't even have to go out there to find unchurched people. Like, literally, when every time we have the opportunity to speak and preach in our church, we are almost certainly speaking to some unbelievers, and 100% sure you are speaking to people who are are babes in Christ. Many of them, of course, some obviously there are some who are mature believers, but we have a large percentage of people who are just hungry, eager to be discipled. As I say, there are women that are growing, and there are men who are not, simply because we just don't, Ken and I have our day jobs. We just don't have the capacity to be offering the kind of discipleship leadership that somebody who who was designated the job might have if they were skilled in discipleship, which is actually why before we took that thing down that you briefly saw, you would have seen that one of the key attributes of someone who we'd be looking for would be someone who was interested in discipleship. We're actually less interested in some of the other things. Obviously, teaching skills is good and all that stuff, but we've survived for many years on a rotation of people, and we anticipate that whoever comes we'd continue in this sort of shared rotational kind of cooperative teaching pattern that's enabled us to survive, and it's enabled us to also all contribute our own voice, but while still working together. But in terms of the discipleship part, particularly of the men, it's been a desert, I'm afraid, and it's held us back. It's kept our church at the church plant level. It's one of the things. There have been others, but that's probably one of the main things.
I would say, kind of related to that, my wife and I have been at the church for 11 years. So we got here just when the founding pastor had resigned. And through those 11 years, we've had, for a group of 25 people as the core, we've had a number of experienced teachers. We've had usually 3 to 4 people with pretty significant teaching experience, and the education to back it up in the teaching rotation, which, there are some churches of over 100 that wouldn't have that. And then we have a disproportionate number of musicians as well. So the Sunday morning experience, and this is what, Sam, you said, it looks like we have the trappings of an established church. It's because the Sunday morning experience looks like that. But from Monday to Saturday, aside from a very active prayer meeting and the ladies' ministry, I would agree with you, Sam, that it's a bit of a desert for men coming in. But there are men coming in. There's people coming in that tuned in online and would never have come to church, and now they come to church every week. And I've talked to them afterwards. They have no idea why they're coming. Yeah, but they know there's something there.
Okay, I want to ask a question of clarification for me. So you're an English-speaking church on the coast of Spain. You call yourselves a church plant. There's obviously missionary and workers who base themselves out of there. Are we looking at expatriates? Are we looking at, in addition, are we looking at English-speaking Spaniards? I'm trying to figure out the focus.
It's pretty broad. It's pretty broad. We have English-speaking Spaniards. We've had points in time where we've done translation into Spanish. We've had points in time where we've had enough Russians that we've done translation into Russian.
Wow. Excuse me, I got to plug in I'm listening, I'm plugging in my computer.
Oh, for sure.
I'm listening.
For sure.
Go ahead.
The last Sunday morning, I realized that the first 8 people that walked through the doors were born in 7 different countries. And the only matching passports were from Iran.
Really?
Yeah. So we had South African, Filipino, Jamaican, British, Iranian, United States, and Canada. And that's kind of the core team that shows up early to run things.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's become a real value for us. It's something. I mean, just personally for me, it's something I love about our church, and it's something that I miss so much when I go back to the States. I feel like there's a number of things that I think are special about our church. That's just one of them, but it's something that I don't know what I'll do someday if I have to move because I've gotten addicted to that.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I understand that for sure. In terms of, I just want to go ahead and speak because I think you're going to ask this question in terms of my discipleship style. Um, of course, I believe in, yeah, a men's Bible study on a Thursday night, or those. I think those have value. But what I have found with men in general is men are alongsiders. It's it's the guy in me that realizes there's 4 or 5 men that are 30 minutes down the line from there, and they're all in that area, and you go, hey, I'm gonna come down on Tuesdays and let's eat lunch together.
Yep.
But they won't do it. But if you initiate it, they will.
Mhm.
And then they don't even realize they're in a discipleship group, but it's a lunch group, and it's very natural. And over time, I've never had problems with, no matter what culture I am, people opening up very quickly to me, even some of the most closed Arab men. Um, I think I lead with vulnerability. I lead with the fact that, you know, I've been married 26 years and I've been in a real marriage. I mean, it has not been an easy one every day. Um, yeah, we always joke when there could not have been 2 more opposite people marrying each other. We didn't know it on that side of the altar. So we lead with those things, and that it's more organic in my approach. And one of the things I really loved when I left my teaching pastor role is I quit having to administrate all the time. And I started being able, and I'm a good administrator. That's not a problem. But it freed me to just be among people and be around people. And if you followed me around just our community, the person at the drive-through of McDonald's, because I like their Diet Coke, I know him. I know who his wife is. I know he lost his mother. I mean, this is the drive-through relationship.
Mhm.
If I'm living on that coast, it wouldn't be long before the people in the coffee shops right there, I would know them. It's just natural for me to do that. So I disciple through relationship before programming.
Mhm.
yep,
Yeah.
we're good with that. You're probably not going to get much of a response from us on that because we're on board with that.
Okay. Yeah. This is a really silly thing. There's a series of books written a while back called Home at Mitford. Father Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
Either one of y'all familiar with it?
I know
Okay.
those. Yeah.
Okay. I'm talking 20-something years ago. I read all 7 of them living in Budapest. And my wife read them too. She goes, that's how you want to end up your life. You want to be a Father Kavanaugh that's just walking around people and marrying and burying and petting their dogs. I went, yeah, you're right. That's who I am. And so yeah, it's
Yeah. No, that I'm glad you said that because that's another really important kind of piece of the puzzle for us. Because we're more honestly we're more interested in culture than program as a church and as a church leaders. We've got a pretty clear idea of the kind of culture that what we like about our culture and what we'd like to foster more of.
okay.
But we're not particularly big program people. And And quite honestly, as I mentioned, even with some of the geographical challenges that I noted, it can be really challenging to maintain weekly life group Bible study kind of things. We've tried that, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't try again in the future, but it's my experience, and I've been in this church for many years. My experience is that it takes an awful lot of work to get them going, and as soon as the champion of it moves on, and in our case we have a rotating door, it just disappears.
Yeah.
So the kind, and I'm not saying that there shouldn't be another life group or whatnot by any stretch of the imagination, but I think what you described as this come alongside style is matches not only what we're looking for, but would actually be a model that actually suits the context here far better.
So I think so.
Why? So you're starting obviously to look into international postings. I'm imagining that you would continue with Interlink.
Culture Link.
Ultralink, yeah. Sorry. In parallel with the role, or is this a transition for you?
Ideally, no, it's not a transition for me. Especially number one, if very clearly when I was Facebooking and getting the information, it was like the lady that was responding to me like twice said, "You need to know this isn't a paid position." I'm like, okay, we don't have to lead with that. It's okay.
Yeah.
So, you need to know. You need to know. I would love a blended model if possible. Yeah, part of Culture Link's income comes from donors and foundations and stuff. But on a non-COVID year, we train a lot of people, and that brings in good income and curriculum sales and things like that. And I have other staff who train besides myself, but when there's a key, we call it some of our key. We know that the Atlanta training class that happens on an annual basis brings in some of the more key churches around the country. And so that would be a weekend that I would want to be able to train that versus the one in York, Pennsylvania. I don't, there's something about being the face of that. So I'd want that blended model. I also, I'm not, I don't want to throw myself under the bus. I don't want to give up the invitations I get. Like this fall, we're to be in Antalya, Turkey, for me to be at that Groundworks conference and providing care and being involved, or the once a year that I'm in Lebanon working with the 65 Syrian and Lebanese people that are doing refugee work and teaching on trauma and teaching on suffering and these kind of things. So I'd like to have some outside expression and blendedness on that. I also, and I don't know the coast or the atmosphere as well as y'all do, but I'd love that to be a destination place for some of y'all's workers who are struggling to come and get some rest and to take a break. I'd like to, I don't know what that would look like, but if the blended model's not possible, then we'd have to look at some discussions. One of the things that I got broadsided with is I mentioned in my letter that I'd been in the process with a church in Egypt. Did y'all read that anywhere in there?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's funny. The head of Groundworks is the guy who asked me to put my name in the hat for the church in Egypt. And they did not have a salary. They did have a an apartment for the pastor. They did have that piece in place, but no salary beyond that. So I went through all these Zoom conversations about a blended model and what it would look like, and you know, all that. Everybody was in agreement. Everybody was in agreement. Everybody was in agreement. And then I flew over on my own dime. It went great. It went great. It went great. And then the search team came back and said, we've discussed it. We need, you're the right guy. We think you may have the wrong availability. And you get 4 weeks off a year to raise your support and vacation and outside ministry. I'm like, okay, that's not even possible.
No.
I mean,
No.
even if I didn't have outside ministry, that isn't even possible. And I felt very bait and switched. I'm like, this isn't. I would not have been on my own dime, but right now they've hired they've actually come back to me and said we now have the wrong person with the right availability.
Yeah, exactly.
And
exactly.
so with that being said, I'm not looking for strict number of days. I like a more fluid calendar where, hey guys, I need to zip down to Antalya this week, and Ken, will you pick up this Sunday for me and teach? And then you're like, well, I'm heading across into North Africa, down Gibraltar. I'm heading over, and we got to that. I like that more of a fluidness than a locked in, set in stone kind of thing.
I
Well,
would say
yeah,
that going that's clearly an option. I can't see how that wouldn't be an option when the income is coming from the outside ministry. But I would also say that the way I function would be, let's figure out what we're trying to accomplish in the church,
Right.
rather than this is how many days you should be doing something.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we've ended up pretty successfully flexing around my travel schedule, Sam's travel schedule. The woman who's the official president of the church legally for Spain, she's in and out of Spain all the time, and we've flexed with that, and we've made it work. So what's your thoughts, Sam?
Absolutely. I was, my thought was just to put your mind at rest, Larry, because what you're describing, your lifestyle and that lifestyle, you're describing us. You're describing Ken and myself, and basically, at least one other person, two other people on the leadership team. And as I said kind of earlier, that even though we're not super comfortable with that title, senior pastor, it kind of not only implies a certain leadership style, but it also implies the kind of time commitment that you described that would be troublesome. I much prefer the idea of you, we already have a small team. It's too small. In order for us to accomplish the things and some of the dreams we have for the church, we need to grow. And your role as pastor would be essentially to, you would be one more person at the table, more than a person, because you would have a role, and you would take more of a leadership role
Right.
at many levels, because you would be the pastor. But having said that, we're very cooperative in everything that happens in our church. The only reason it survived for the last 10, 11 years is that the teaching's not all done by one person, and the follow-up's not all done. The member care kind of stuff within the context of church is not all done by one person. And it's almost, we're always in and out. My job involves a lot of travel, as does Ken's. It's happened pretty well that oftentimes we've been out of sync enough that usually when Ken's gone, I'm here, and vice versa. Surprisingly so, actually. Sometimes it doesn't work at all. Adding you to the mix, there wouldn't be the expectation that you would have to be, that you'd be our only teacher, be preaching all the time. You'd probably preach more than we would, but we would, we would anticipate that there would be a small teaching team, which you would grow and be the lead of. But it wouldn't all fall on your shoulders. This area here in Malaga is, because it's a major tourist destination, it has a very well-served airport. It's a great place to hub out of.
Yeah, definitely.
You can get direct flights from here to Turkey. So it actually, it's also very much of a kind of member care hub. There's a lot of Christian organizations that have set up their member care stations here. So there's a lot of opportunities for you to network there as well if you wish. We can talk more about certain specifics of how things would look, and if you want that to be written down on paper, we can do that too. But all that to say, we already, those of us who make the church run already are in the mode that you described, and I don't really have a problem with you being in that mode as well. People would understand that because they've been dealing with us for years.
Yeah, and I think there's something really positive about that we've got a number of people in the church that are going away, doing ministry. The church is praying for whatever I'm doing in Brazil and whatever Sam's doing in Turkey, and then they come back and get a report. It gives them a bigger picture of the world, and adding another person into that would be, I think, wonderful.
One thing, Sam, what's been interesting, you said a lot of the agencies have some member care basis in the area.
Mm-hmm.
What has been interesting for Karen and I, we found kind of surprising is, like, I'm sure y'all are familiar with Frontiers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though we can't say the name, and hopefully we're not going to be thrown out or anything, but
Right.
so a large number of that org is at Groundworks, and they have their own care teams. But it's interesting, we've been brought in sometimes because people need somebody outside their organization.
Yep.
Sure.
They can only be as vulnerable because they just keep having this feeling that this person is going to report to my boss, or this person is, and so it's been interesting to be able to support caring ministries by kind of being a freelancer
Mm-hmm.
in some ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's just an interesting piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, we've both commented on how when we go back to, I go back to Canada and do a home assignment, you go into churches and you end up playing that role because you're only going to be there one Sunday. You say something in your presentation and somebody comes up and tells you stuff that you think, how are you telling this to a stranger? And you say, have you ever said this to the pastor? They're like, oh, I couldn't say it to the pastor. But you're going to be gone. You're going to be in Spain next week. I can tell you anything. Yeah, it's a huge advantage.
It really is. And, I kind of look at Paul zipping in and out of churches, and I'm thinking, I think that's somehow why he got to know the good, bad, and ugly sometimes on a level in regard to that. Can I ask a couple of just logistical questions? This sounds so cold, but not. In terms of what's it cost to have an apartment right there on the coast? I mean, what's that look like? Fortunately, we're not planning on giving up our home back here. We're a debt-free family. Our house is paid off. I think it'd be foolish for us to not have that destination space at this point. I'm 58 years old. So, we would be adding a mortgage or a rent onto our budget that we currently have. Cost of living, what's it take to have that kind of an apartment?
Yeah.
Is a car necessary in your community? Is it not? Those kind of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so let me say this, while the church is can't commit to a salary, we have in the past been able to help out fairly significantly with housing.
Okay.
Um, so so that would be on the table.
Mhm.
It there we would we would, we'd have to talk about details, but I would expect that there would be a housing there would be a housing allowance that it might not cover your entire rent depending on what kind of place you'd like to get, but it would cover a good chunk of it. So
Do you know what rents are like down that end of the coast, Sam? Do you know what Tom was paying?
uh, I'm gonna guess about 1,200 euros.
So it's even more than down where we are.
It's more than where we were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess 11, 12. Could go lower if you wanted. That would be for a nice apartment. You could downscale from that. But
You're talking probably 3 bedroom where you could entertain for about 11
Right.
or 12.
And it is furnished locations possible.
they're
Yeah,
all furnished. Yeah. It's a
almost.
strange thing about Spain, but typically furnished is assumed.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Because I can tell you, this juncture, we're like throw in a couple, get our bags in place and go, not try to, crate up and move. That's not our style right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, if there was interest on your end, and we get your wife involved and hear her side of things, we probably invite you out on a tourist visa for 2 to 3 months,
okay.
and find a place, put you up, and so you could be with us, and we all can test the waters. You can see if you like it and how it works, and after um, you know after you get up to 90 days, as just on a U.S. tourist visa, and after that, if everybody's happy and you want to come back and we're all good, then you'd go back to the States and we'd start the hard work of getting your actual residency, which would take some months.
Um,
You
yeah.
asked about a car. Car is it? Yeah, you definitely need to get a
Okay.
car.
Yeah. You need to
And
get a car. Yeah.
and
And
within 6 months of being a resident, you'd need to get a Spanish license.
Okay.
and
So you've got 6 months to drive on your US license.
yeah. And I won't hide the fact from you that getting a license here is a bit of a pain.
It is.
So it involves, it's not like, oh, I have to turn in my US driver's license and I get one. No, you have to go back to school. You have to actually pass the tests. And
You
so
can do
it's,
that in English in a number of places along the coast. So you don't have to learn Spanish in 6 months to the point where you can
Right.
pass a driver's exam.
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just so you understand our region a little bit. So Ken and I are talking to you from Malaga, and we live in 100% Spanish neighborhoods for the most part. I mean, we are in true Spain. But as you drive down the coast towards the church, which means driving west, uh, the whole demographic changes. And basically, about 15, 20 minutes west of here, you enter into this tourist zone where basically it's more dominated by expats than by Spaniards, and it's in that area that the church is located. So all of a sudden, even many of the street signs are in English or in Russian,
Mhm.
and you have German communities and Dutch communities and Russian and Ukrainian and Bulgarian communities, and
You basically go west out of Malaga and you go through blue collar UK, then you go through Scandinavia, and then you start entering into Russia, and then eventually you get to Marbella where you've got the sheiks with their yachts with helicopters on them. So it just gets more and more expensive as you move towards Gibraltar.
And the church is exactly where on this coast?
It's kind of dead center of the coast of this
Okay.
tourist area.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so how far from the church to Gibraltar?
About hour and 20. Is
Okay.
that right, Sam?
Even less, I would say. It's because it's
Okay.
about an hour and 20 from here, isn't it?
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's right. It's
I,
probably 45 minutes then.
I would say 45 minutes to Gibraltar. Yeah. If
Okay,
you
and
if you find Marbella on the map, which is easy to do, you find Marbella on the map. The church is just I would say about 12 kilometers east of Marbella along the coast.
okay, I'm
Well,
opening a document real quick and I'm gonna ask you to spell this for me. How do you spell Marbella?
I just wrote the little town or little area in the chat,
Okay.
Sitio de Calahonda. If you put that in Google Maps, it'll drop you right in our area.
That will be the area of the church, you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, the little township where the church is located at is called the Sitio de Calahonda, and basically it's about 12 kilometers east of Marbella. I'm gonna put that in the chat too, so you can kind of.
Okay, I'm cutting and pasting these out. And then, and so you would imagine me trying to live near the church locations, that ideally?
I'd say within 10 minutes either way,
Yeah,
you'd be able to find something.
yeah, it would be
Okay.
good. It would be helpful to be within a 10-minute radius probably of the church.
Well, I'm sitting there, if you're describing people down both directions on the line,
Exactly.
I'm not sure I want to be on this end of the line
Yeah,
and then
that's it.
it's
No,
and then
absolutely not.
90 minutes to get to the other end of the line. It'd be better to be in the middle and go,
Yep.
You just described Ken and my major problem because we live all the way over on the east end of things. So, for me, just going to the church involves, about, or for both of us, that's what, an hour and 10 minutes in the car round trip, without counting the time you're at church. So,
but you need to realize I live in Atlanta. That's
yeah.
just normal.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Um,
Except
it-
here,
yeah.
gasoline costs $8 a gallon. So,
well, we don't have gas. Y'all hear about the shortage?
oh, I've heard you're having troubles.
Yeah, no, yeah, it was ridiculous. Yeah, we went about 10 days with no gasoline.
My word.
Now, but fortunately, we have one of our vehicles is a diesel, so we were in good shape. Our family. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, Sam, I think you're really got a good view of yourself because you just said, the major problem of you and Ken is the distance. You have no other problems in your life than that. So I'm glad to hear that. So,
You're a member care,
Sam
right?
speaks for himself
yeah,
there.
member care, right?
Oh man.
Uh,
Give me a
real
couple hours, I'll
quickly,
come cry on your shoulder.
all right, real quickly, tell me about y'all's families. How long you've been married, children? Sam,
Yeah,
I did
go ahead, Sam.
stalk your Facebook and saw, I think, a picture of your backside with some kid behind next to you or
Oh
something like
yeah. Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
not
so-
a big I probably haven't posted on Facebook in years, but yeah, I do have an account there. That gives you a window onto my wife's life because that picture actually was taken in a little island in the Caribbean where her parents were missionaries years ago, back in the 70s. A little island called Dominica, and her dad planted a church there, which still exists today. And she grew up there, and we went back and visited a few years ago, and that's where that picture was taken. I forgot that was still up on my Facebook page. But I think Ken mentioned that I grew up in North Africa, primarily in Algeria and Morocco. My parents were also workers, and we came back to the States when I was 15 years old, and I met my wife in northern Indiana while I was transitioning. I was going through the fog of cultural transition because I actually didn't speak English all that well at the time, and went to a little tiny, very conservative high school, Christian high school there, really was a very positive experience for me, actually. I don't know what I would have done if I jumped right into the big consolidated Warsaw High, which was massive, and I think I would have sunk. But then I met my wife as a junior, actually, in high school. We started dating as juniors, so I've known her since I was 17, I guess. And I studied engineering at Purdue University,
Okay.
and while I was there, got involved with a group called the Navigators,
Yeah.
And to make a long story very, very short, it was during those first couple of years at Purdue, I began rethinking my career choice and realizing I just kind of felt a call to ministry. I didn't know what. It wasn't, certainly was not missionary work, I can tell you that. But I thought it might be campus ministry because I'd gotten involved with that and was
Right.
enjoying that. But the Lord had other plans, and I decided I need to go to seminary. So I actually didn't finish my engineering degree. I transferred to a little school in the north of Indiana called Grace College. It was Grace College and Grace Theological Seminary up there, and I finished up my college with what I thought would be a better pre-sem degree than engineering. So I ended up with a degree in English literature and history. And then went straight into the seminary and did my MDiv, and then thought we'd be right into ministry, and God didn't open the doors, and spent 8 years working in industry, in the publishing industry, before being, long story short, my parents, my in-laws by then, they had returned to the States from the island I mentioned, and had returned to the mission field, this time to Guyana, and we're living in Georgetown. And on a visit there, I was asked by a different missionary, not them, if I would come back the following year and do some teaching for some pastors on Islam. And I did that, and it was, I was just a young, I don't know what I was. I was in my mid 20s. I was 26, 27 maybe. And it was at that time that I felt a strong call to the mission field. Going back to the Muslim world was probably on my no-go list. That was not something even though I'd grown up there, it was not something I wanted to do. But the Lord had other plans, and we joined Avant because they had, I was actually recruited to do theological education by extension teaching in Morocco. And so we raised our support to that end. And then went to language school in France. I already spoke French, but my wife needed it, and then went to Morocco and ended up being there only 2 years because the mission changed the strategy around about that time, and we were asked if we would come up to Malaga and help with an Arabic media center that the organization has here, and help them transition to, they were transitioning to satellite television after having done years of radio work. So we moved out of Morocco after having been there only a couple of years, and came up to Spain, and we've been here ever since. So yeah, that's
Your children, you have children?
I have 2 boys who are just out of college.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Where did they go to school?
they went to a school called John Brown University.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not too shabby.
Yeah. Do you know it? It's in
Yeah,
Northwest Arkansas.
Yeah, I know where it is. Yeah. And what are they doing now?
So one of them married a gal he met at the school, and she's a nurse, and she's working on a PhD in nursing, specifically in, she wants to be a midwife, but she wants to run a delivery center. So you
Right.
need to do that. I guess you need the highest level of midwifery certification, which is some form of doctorate. And so they have just moved to Cincinnati for her to pursue that, because in Northwest Arkansas, they're not really set up for that very well. So like just this past week, they moved.
Okay.
They're looking for a place in Cincinnati right now. And then my older son is still in Northwest Arkansas. He got a job actually not too far from the school. He's in Fayetteville, working for a market research company. So, yeah.
Mhm.
All right, Ken, give me a rundown.
I'll give you the rundown. My wife and I met at Bible College in Toronto. So
Okay.
she'd come up to Canada from Pittsburgh to go to school. So we've been married 30 years next month, 30 years on June 22nd.
First 30 are the hardest. It's uphill from there.
Oh, good, good.
Good.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Good to hear.
Yeah, we came to Spain in 96 and we were
Good.
part of doing theological education and planting a church here. And about 8 years later, 7 years later, the mission asked us to lead a team, a church planting team to Poland. We didn't have anybody in Poland.
Right.
So we handed off the Bible Institute that I was directing to put it under another school, and the church here in Malaga adopted our church plant. And we went and we were 5 years in Poland planting a church there. I have two kids. They were both born in the first time here in Spain in 97 and 2000. So yeah, they kind of did kindergarten through 5th grade in Poland. And then we came back here to Spain because I was asked to be our regional director for Europe for the mission. And then I'm going to say 5 years ago, maybe 6, they asked me to take a vice president position over, as I said, Europe, North Africa, and
Right.
the Americas. So yeah, my kids are, one is married to another missionary kid from the same organization that we're part of. She grew up in Italy, so they've known each other since they were in the nursery at our Europe conferences together. He works at an inner city mission. He got halfway through a degree, a business degree, and was talking to me about how hard it's going to be to have to wait for 2 years going to school in Canada with his fiance going to school in Kansas City. And I said, well, why don't you just get married then? So he stopped studying, went down, he's working in the accounting department of an inner city mission in Kansas City.
Okay.
And piecemeal is going to try to finish his degree. And the other son, who is 20, really got messed up by COVID. He had a job lined up in a school as a teacher's assistant, and that obviously didn't happen in September. So he spent most of the last year building a YouTube channel and has now just last week taken off to be the head counselor at a camp that our mission runs in Juneau, Alaska. So he's up there for 3 months. Doesn't know really what he wants to do with his life, but I have this funny feeling that a summer in ministry, knowing the people who are around him, might head him in that direction.
Right.
He's going to do a 1-year Bible college degree at Miller College of the Bible in Canada in the fall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like all three of us have kids in that same window. I have a
Yeah.
22-year-old and a 20-year-old. So
Yeah.
Yeah. And my daughter's knee deep in navigators at Georgia Tech, and
Oh, cool.
and my son just graduated last weekend from Covenant College. So
Yeah.
that's good. Well, I hate to cut y'all off, but I got a lunch appointment in 15 minutes.
Not a
So
problem.
y'all can I'll log off and y'all can talk about me behind my back, because that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And we'll be in touch.
Sounds good, Larry. It's been really good.
Can I pray over us?
Please
Yeah,
do.
would you?
Please do.
Yeah. Father, I'm just always grateful that your work is your work and we get to participate in it. You have a plan, you have direction, you have the knowledge, and the three of us want to submit ourselves to discovering that with you and in you. Bless our families, bless our children, bless their direction, bless our wives. Bless our ministries, Lord. Just give us that favor that comes from you in all those aspects. In your son's name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
We'll be in touch, Larry.
All
Yeah,
right.
for sure.
It's
For
been
sure.
I didn't, all of a sudden I looked up. That was a fast hour and a half. I
That
appreciate
was.
it.
That
Thanks.
was.
All
All
right.
right.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Great
Talk to you
talking with
later. All right.
You can stop recording if we want.
Yeah, let's do that. Thanks for reminding me.